Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here once again, as always, forever, with Tom Orr. Tom, how you doing?
The Buckeye Weekly podcast, till death do we part. I like that. That's good. Didn't realize what I was signing up when I started doing it, but okay, here we are.
Yep, you should have read the contract, buddy. If you couldn't make it out, it was because it was written on a wet napkin and, whatever, but still. The gist was there.
When you made me sign it in blood, I should have known, but live and learn.
So, how you doing?
I'm great. It's another beautiful evening to sit inside and talk about football when football's 5 months away.
It is really just a beautiful night right now. It's perfect weather, the kind of weather where there's no weather, although it is getting a little chilly, which is still good too, because, that's good sleeping weather. Not that I'm going to fall asleep, because there's so much going on right now. There's so much to talk about, which is actually not true. But in the rundown here, I have that there's not a lot to talk about. And of course, like 1 hour later, Matthew Baldwin ends up being reported that he is ending up and will transfer to TCU. I guess he just visited this past weekend. It's about a 3-hour drive from where he lives, 3.5 hours, 4 hours, depending on how fast you drive. And in Texas, they drive pretty fast, but it just depends on traffic, I guess. So he's going to end up at TCU with Jalen Reagor, the receiver who put up nearly 100 yards against the Buckeyes last year, and the two running backs that they had last year who put up, I believe, was 750 yards rushing against the Buckeyes last year. The interesting thing, Tom, is he leaves a situation where he has just one guy he's competing with. And this spring, they had one article I read had it as a 3-man race with like a redshirt freshman who was the number 3 dual threat passer in the nation last year. And then true freshman Max Duggan, who had an Ohio State offer, I believe. And then a graduate transfer from Kansas State who has played, here and there over the last 3 years. And that wasn't even including the guy who started 4 games last year for Sean Robinson at TCU. So it's like a 4-man battle. And then Matthew Baldwin enters the picture. And I don't think it really gets easier. There's certainly more bodies to contend with, and that's assuming he even gets his immediate eligibility, which I think we all assume he will. But, Tom, it's not like he's just going to walk in there and start, is he?
I don't think you can assume that he's going to walk in and start that first game. I mean, you have a guy who started a few games at the end of last year, and if you remember the Cheez-It Bowl, it wasn't great. It was not really what you're looking for. I don't know that he was even the guy who's back, because the guy who started the Cheez-It Bowl was a walk-on. I think the guy who is back was hurt that game, but TCU was not fantastic last year, regardless of who the quarterback was. It's an opportunity. There is no one as good as Justin Fields on that roster. So from that perspective, he has a better chance of being the day one starter than he did at Ohio State, but you're also going against 4 other guys, and you're not in a spot where if the starter gets hurt, you're basically the new starter by default. So it's a good opportunity, and he probably has a better chance of being the 2020 starter at TCU than he did at Ohio State. So, maybe that played into it. And we certainly heard that there was, off-field homesickness kind of things that played into his decision as well. So it's probably a better fit for him for that perspective as well. But, as we said, if he was the clear-cut number 1 at Ohio State, I don't know if homesickness would have been an issue, but as it shook out, he wanted to go closer to home. He ended up closer to home, and he's at a very solid, good program, and he has probably a better chance to be a starter either this year or next.
You don't think if he is the starting quarterback right now that he leaves for TCU to battle 4 other guys for the job? That's pretty cynical of you, Tom, to think that he would not want to leave or not want to embark on a challenge like TCU after securing the victory in the quarterback battle at Ohio State. I think it's about accomplishments and how much can you accomplish and stepping stones. And as we all know, Ohio State is a stepping stone to TCU. So, Tom, I think you'll be proven wrong with your cynicism and your, I don't know, distrust of human nature.
I'm pretty sure I said this on the podcast last week, but I can't recall any starting quarterback who left a Power 5 school for, anything other than significantly ill family member or something like that was sort of an immediate crisis. So when you are the returning starter or going to be the starter that year, all the other stuff sort of works itself out, it seems like. So, and I don't think I got anything from anyone this week that was like, oh no, what about this guy? So I think I'm going to assume I'm going to declare myself undefeated on that one.
Yeah, because if the internet doesn't what about you, then there is no one to what about.
Yeah, I mean, no one added me, and I don't think I said don't at me. So, and even if I did, no one listens, so it's fine. I must be right.
A year ago at this time, we were talking about Joe Burrow had just announced his transfer, and there's the big news going on. Joe Burrow was transferring, and also we came up with the name of the Don Brown show. You dubbed it Brown Thunder, and so that stuck. And so those are the two big things that are about a year old. So we can happy birthday to Joe Burrow transferring, and also happy 1 year anniversary to Brown Thunder, the greatest show to maybe one day ever live. Tom, how often do you think about Brown Thunder? How often do you get teary-eyed about it?
I have 2 kids, but on my mantle I have a picture frame with 3 picture openings, and it's the picture of my 2 kids and a picture of the movie poster I designed for Brown Thunder. So that's what's on my mantle. I think about it every day.
Yeah, impossible not to. I don't know how to go from that to this, but I'm going to do it anyway. You mentioned Justin Fields, and this is just something that came up today and it's not new. It's not just coming up today, but I want to speak about a PSA for people regarding Justin Fields, because every time I write about him now, I already know what the comments are going to be, and I'm not saying this is the majority of Buckeye fans, because it's not, and we know the majority of people who comment on stories or tweet aren't the vocal majority, the majority, they're the vocal minority. And even the people who tweet and comment, there's some segments of the population on this side and this side. But I always know whenever I write about Justin Fields, and I did it this morning, Tuesday morning, about just a little fun little story about how KJ Hill this spring said that Justin Fields has a stronger arm than Dwayne Haskins. And so that's what I wrote about. And I knew going into that, like, don't forget to write also in here that, yes, we know it's not just about arm strength. We know there are other factors to the quarterback, and that's not just you need more than arm strength. And so I know to put that in there because I'm trying to eliminate some of these comments that I'm going to see, but it doesn't eliminate it. And there's still just the same, like the doubting, or not even the doubting, just the pointing out of the obvious. Yes, we know a quarterback needs to be accurate. Tom, we know that. Yes, we know a quarterback needs to do this and needs to do that. This was just about having a strong arm, and something that people I thought would want to read about, and they did. And then you have the few who always like to point out blah, blah, blah. And the other thing that I find is a few people, the people that I'm speaking about, who doubt Justin Fields because he wasn't able to start as a true freshman over Justin Fromm, who led his team to the national title game as a true freshman. And we got into this a little bit on Twitter Tuesday night before the show. It's incredibly hard to win a job as a true freshman quarterback right out of the gate. I don't even think Trevor Lawrence did that. I think maybe Kelly Bryant maybe started the first game of the season. I don't know, but when Trevor Lawrence, who is seen as, one of these generational quarterbacks, is the guy that some fans point to and say, well, Justin Fields isn't very good because he can't do that. Well, you have to look at the situations that each quarterback is in, and I don't understand it because the last two Heisman Trophy winners transferred from where they were. That's kind of a big deal. But you look at all of the Ohio State quarterbacks, like Braxton Miller eventually started as a freshman, but that was desperation. And Terrell Pryor eventually took the job because Todd Beckman looked shell-shocked after that USC game and before it, actually. And, Troy Smith was a kick returner as a true freshman. Cardale Jones wasn't even a real live quarterback until he was thrown into the game against Michigan in 2014. So the idea that if you're this high-ranked guy and you don't start as a freshman, I don't know where that comes from. And it's completely unfair to the players, and it's so illogical because it just doesn't happen that often. And I don't mean to ramble, Tom, but I wanted to set aside some time so that I could ramble.
That's really what this is all about. It's not, we don't have a ton of news to talk about. So this is time to get it all out now before we have a more intense news cycle.
Welcome to the Buckeye Ramble.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you touched on a lot of it there. The two guys who started as true freshmen at Ohio State in the last, other than Miller and Pryor, has anyone done it since Art Schlichter? Did Greg Fry start as a true freshman? I think he had a redshirt year, right? Because he was only a 3-year starter.
Yeah, he was a 3-year starter his final 3 years.
Yeah,
so.
I think there's been two guys who've done it since Art Schlichter, and they were replacing Joe Bauserman, who is rather notably not as good as Jake Fromm, and Todd Beckman, who, I think that Todd Beckman was a very respectable quarterback. Todd Beckman was a better quarterback than Joe Bauserman, but Todd Beckman was not as good as Jake Fromm. And really, on their merits, I don't know that Terrell Pryor was a better quarterback than Todd Beckman when they put Terrell Pryor in there against Troy in 2008. That seemed very much like a Jim Tressel recognized that because they got bombed the way they did at USC, they lost 35-3 in that game, and it was one of those not as close as the score indicated things. There was the chances of a national championship were completely gone after that point. So go ahead and play the true freshman who is the long-term answer at that position. Get him experience. You're not going to have meaningfully worse results with him. Give him a year of experience and go from there. Last year for Georgia, they did not, Jake Fromm was not a senior who was going to leave after that year. They were playing for a national championship all season long. So it was a completely different situation. So it's not a very satisfying answer to just say, yeah, he didn't play because the guy ahead of him was pretty good too, and they were playing for a national championship, but that's pretty much it. You kind of need special circumstances to start a true freshman, and those circumstances did not exist at Georgia last year.
Interestingly, Todd Beckman was a first-team All-Big Ten selection in 2007 by the media. He was honorable mention by the coaches. Terrell Pryor was never even second-team All-Big Ten, which, I think we all agree that he didn't live up to his potential, but he was still, I believe, through my research back in the day, the first quarterback to ever lead his team to a BCS game in each of his first 3 seasons on campus. So, pretty good. And I think it was probably hard to live up to the hype anyway, no matter how good he was. But just because Justin Fields doesn't start as a freshman, and relax, just understand that very few do, and a lot of the greats never did. Tim Tebow never did. Cam Newton never did. Arguably 2 of the top 5 quarterbacks in college football history. I don't know. Vince Young split time as a true freshman. Is that your recollection with Chris Sims?
I was going to say Jevin Sneed, but maybe I'm mixing up eras of Texas football. I am not prepared to discuss.
Jevin Sneed, I believe, is Colt McCoy.
That could be. Yep, that could be. Maybe.
If you don't want to discuss Texas quarterback history, then you're on the wrong show. And remember, you signed in blood. So.
Okay, cool. Hook 'em.
There you go. So I don't know. You have anything else on the quarterbacks, or should, like I said, there isn't a lot of going on. So this is mostly listener questions, but we've got some decent ones and somebody asking for a deep dive. So We can dive deep if you like, Tom.
Let's start diving. The first one is from @Tyler Feeney 1. Really itching for a deep dive on the defense, especially the back seven. I know that you guys have touched on it in past episodes, but what is the real expectation for the 2019 defense? 2018 was historically bad by Buckeye standards. Will Hafley and company right the ship?
Tom, it has not yet been said on this show, but the defense cannot be any worse than it was last year or the year before. I just want to put that out there. I want to coin that. I will own that. Be the first one to say that. I think this will be closer to the 2016 defense than the 18 defense. But that 2016 defense was, freakish with Malik Hooker and Marshawn Lattimore and those guys. So I'm not saying it's going to be like that. I think it will be more like that. It would have been nice to be able to talk to the coaches after spring to get a better idea of where things stand, but I still don't think we would have gotten many answers because Al Washington isn't going to tell us any negatives, and Jeff Hafley wouldn't be able to tell us much about Jordan Fuller and what he's going to be doing because, he was injured. But and this isn't necessarily buying in on Jeff Hafley, who I am totally bought in on, but I expect a much better defense, and not just because they can't get any worse, but because they've brought in guys that will make it better. I still wonder, Greg Madison, when he was hired, we were both like, it's odd, but whatever. And I think maybe you said it the first time at that point that the defense can't get any worse. But I expect a much better defense, and I'll let you weigh in on that, and then I'm going to start giving you some over-unders for you to pick and choose, and we can discuss the defense a little bit further. But so you think it's going to be a bad defense again? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
At least as bad as last year. That I think has been my position very consistently. I mean, just to put last year in perspective, I went back and looked at S&P Plus, which is a kind of an advanced statistical system that adjusts for opponent and adjusts for tempo and all that kind of stuff. Because if you just look at points per game, the teams that play at higher tempos give up more points, but it's not necessarily because they're worse. So there's stuff like that this adjusts for. So it just kind of gives you a better overall sense of how a team did in certain situations. So last year, against the pass in S&P Plus, against the run, Ohio State was 76th in the country. Against the pass, they were 62nd in the country. And in explosive plays, like allowing big plays, they were 118th in the country. So the best of those three was 62nd, and that was against the pass. You have to go back to 2013 to find a year when Ohio State has finished worse than 62nd in any of those categories. And that was that atrocious 2013 defense that just got torched at the end of the year. And that was against the pass. And that defense, which you think of as absolutely atrocious, was 73rd in against the pass. And that defense got torched by Michigan. They got torched by Michigan State. They got torched by Clemson. So, and that's the last time there was one of those categories that was as bad as 62nd in any of those. And last year it was all three of them. I mean, to be 118th in explosive plays allowed, that is, that's like you're down with like UConn and UTEP and the absolute dregs of FBS. So, given the talent available to Ohio State, there's just absolutely no excuse for them to be anywhere near there. And I can say with almost complete certainty they won't be down there again this year, just because the talent is still there. It's not like they suddenly have fallen off and they're playing a bunch of marginal 3-stars everywhere on the field. The talent is still there. The scheme is going to be better. And it literally, we keep saying this, it literally cannot be as bad as it was last year. That was such a historical anomaly that it's still bizarre that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look just at against the run and against the pass, Ohio State in 2018, 76th and 62nd. 2017, number 2 and number 5. Like that's where they normally are. 2016, number 20, number 7. 2015, number 11, number 3. I mean, it's just, you go back and it's just, they are top 20 in everything every year, and then all of a sudden last year 76th and 62nd. I think they're probably not going to return to a top 5 in everything kind of defense this year. That's probably not a realistic expectation in the first year as they're sort of figuring out this new system with new coaches and all that. But if they're just back in a top 20 kind of defense, that's plenty. Like, the offense is going to score. If the defense is just remotely capable this year, they should have a very good year. And I don't think there's any reason to think that they won't be at least that kind of top 20 defense again.
The 2017 defense kind of gets just lumped in with the 2018 defense because of the Oklahoma game, the Penn State game, and the Iowa game. But you look at the rush defense, that year they allowed 2.9 yards per carry. And then last year that goes up to 4.5. And in 2017, they allowed 13 rushing touchdowns. Last year that doubled to 26. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times they allowed 2 rushing touchdowns or more compared to just 3 times in 2017. And that includes the 2018 season with the 5 touchdowns on the ground in the overtime game against Maryland. And it was, I know it's not a popular opinion, but I think it was time for a change after that 2018 season. I don't want to just spout off hot takes, but allowing 7 yards a carry to Maryland on 48 attempts should get somebody fired, probably 2 or 3 people fired, and that's kind of what happened. So I expect, I don't know, if they just get back to the 2017, somewhere between 2017, 2016, and at all levels, I think that would be, that's where they should be. That's the Ohio State defense. And that hasn't necessarily been the Ohio State defense under Urban Meyer. But as you said, there's more tempo. So the numbers are going to be bigger, like the overall numbers, the yardage per game stuff is going to be bigger than it was under Jim Tressel, who was trying to shorten the game. And it's however you want to do it. This defense should be closer to one of the better defenses of the Urban Meyer era, even though we are now in the Ryan Day era. But, Tom, this is where I start to have some questions, and it goes back to the linebackers, the new system, how aggressive will it be? There's some Don Brown things in here, but it's not, I don't expect it to be Don Brown's aggressive blitzing style constantly, because I don't think they need to be. But I want to ask you a couple of things here. Tuf Borland, even though he hasn't necessarily been healthy this spring, but he probably would have played if they needed him to. I still see him winning the job just because, and I don't know if it's any other reason more than just because. Yes, he knows the defense, but it's supposed to be a simplified defense, and so it should be easier for everybody else to know. But he's a captain, and whenever we talk to players, they talk about Tuf as a good leader. He's this, he's that. He knows everything. He does that and this. So if I put the over/under on starts for Tuf at 6.5, where are you going?
Probably over that. He's. I would be somewhat surprised if he was not starting that opening game, and he's had some injury issues, so maybe he gets hurt and then doesn't hit 6.5 for that reason. But I think that it's probably realistic to think that he will start the year as a starter, and then you're relying on someone to unseat him. Maybe they shift at, maybe they're starting a nickel a few games and he doesn't get there for that reason or something like that.
True. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I guess I think the safer bet there is probably over 6.5. What about you?
That's where I am, because I expect him to start. And if he's going to win the job out of camp, I wouldn't expect him to lose the job during the season. This is a defense that is probably better suited for him and what they're asking him to do. I assume, or else they wouldn't have him winning the job. And not that they have him winning the job, he would win the job, and they wouldn't be giving it to him. But would you go over 3.5 starts for either Browning or Baron Browning or Taraji Mitchell?
Probably not. At that point, I think you're probably to get to there, you'd have to have him getting hurt, have Borland getting hurt to get one of them to 3.5 starts. So I guess I would probably take the under, probably, because I feel like coming out of spring camp, I feel like Borland is still at the top of the heap there, and I don't think we saw anything out of Mitchell or Browning that would lead me to believe they're about to, like, right on the cusp of leapfrogging Borland. You know, neither of them. I mean, Browning didn't really pop at all during spring. Mitchell had some moments in the spring that I felt like I noticed him and kind of went, "Ooh, that's not bad." But I think Borland is probably somewhat comfortably ahead right now.
I feel this way. I'm with you on Borland. I left spring thinking more of Taraji Mitchell than I did going in. A lot of that was from watching the coaches clinic when Al Washington kept showing clips of Taraji Mitchell making plays after initially making mistakes and overcoming that through his nose for the ball, his athleticism, his linebacker instinct, whatever, his determination. I left spring ball thinking no more of Baron Browning, and I guess by definition thinking less of him than I did going in, because we keep waiting for him and it just doesn't happen. And he's a tremendous athlete and he looks how you want your linebackers to look. I don't know that Tough Borland is one of those guys where, like in the NFL when Kurt Coleman is like this, where every year the team tries to replace him through the draft or to bring somebody else in, and he sticks around and he doesn't get replaced and he starts for a few years. I don't feel like they are looking to replace Tough Borland. They're allowing guys to try to do it, but Baron Browning hasn't done it. And I left spring thinking I don't know if he's ever going to start. Maybe next year at the will, and he'll get 1 year as a starter. But even that's not a guarantee, because if you talk about linebackers, one of the top guys they're going to talk about is Dallas Gant, and he's at the will this year behind Malik Harrison. So I'm not writing Baron Browning off at all. I just don't have any expectations for him to do anything of significance or, any starting significance this season. Where are you?
He's someone who, going into the spring, I had him on the list of guys who this was a really big spring for.
Yep.
And it was a whole lot of guys who were going into their last year, and then Baron Browning, because it was like, all right, well, he's been here a couple of years now. If he's going to make the leap, this is the time he's going to make the leap, potentially, before this season. And then I'm right with you. I came out of spring ball, and I did not. He certainly did not make the leap this spring, and he was
injured a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, he missed some time because there was at least one practice where we looked and Taraji Mitchell was running with the ones, and it was like, where is everybody? And Borland and Browning were both hurt. So, that's a little bit of a caveat. So I'm right with you. You don't write him off. You're going into fall camp and see what happens coming out of fall camp. But he was someone who seemed like he had a chance, like there was an opportunity there that Borland was not, an all-world linebacker, and then he got hurt. So there was an opportunity there, and Browning, for, whether it was because of the injury or some other reason, just didn't really seize it. Because I'm right with you. Like I said, there was nothing about Browning this spring that I remember, like, very clearly, like, oh yeah, Baron Browning did this. There were a few plays that I remember Taraji Mitchell, and kind of went, oh, that was pretty good. Like, that was impressive. And you could kind of see him taking a step forward. And I just didn't really see that out of Baron Browning this spring. And this was the time I was thinking that we really had a chance to see it, and it just never quite happened for one reason or another.
And yet it was Browning with the ones in the spring game. And he started 3 or 4 games last year, but never put up a bunch of tackles. You're talking about a middle linebacker who would get, 1 to 3 tackles a game that he's starting. And it's that's not the production that you should be getting there. But he was with the ones for a reason, probably in the spring game. We don't make a big deal of the spring game, but you take note of who's with the ones because that's who is leading at the end of spring camp, at least in terms of the healthy players. And if Taraji Mitchell is third behind Tough Borland and Baron Browning, that gives him even more ground that he has to make up. And I know a lot of Buckeye fans want to see him starting. Let me ask you this. What defense do you think has more potential? The one with Tough Borland starting in it or the one with Taraji Mitchell starting in it?
Potential, I think.
Yes.
Almost unquestionably Mitchell. Tough Borland has started for a couple of years and has looked varying degrees of good depending on when he was, what the system was, and how potentially still maybe banged up he was last year. I mean, he played all last year after recovering from an Achilles injury, and Urban Meyer kept talking about how he was a real fast healer, and that's all well and good, but he looked like a guy who wasn't 100% healthy last fall. So, and then he wasn't 100% healthy this spring. So I don't think we've seen the best of Tough Borland yet. So there's still room for improvement there. But Taraji Mitchell was kind of a non-factor last year, and then this spring looked like, the lights had kind of come on, and he, that learning curve was starting to slope upward pretty steeply. So I think there's probably the ceiling is probably a little higher with Taraji Mitchell, and that may not be how good he is this fall versus how good Tough Borland is this fall. But ultimately, I think it's probably pretty clear that the ceiling for Mitchell, if he gets there, is higher than Borland.
And fans would certainly be more forgiving of Taraji Mitchell's mistakes than Tough Borland's if they would even notice Mitchell not being able to get somewhere. Brendan White, and I mentioned this a little earlier, he's playing a position where the Viper at Michigan, Bullet at Ohio State. At Michigan, that position would be in the backfield quite a bit, and it would allow like Jabril Peppers or Khaleke Hudson to get 16, 17, 15 tackles for loss in a season. One game, Khaleke Hudson had 8 tackles for loss in 2017. So that gives you an idea of how often they're allowed to blitz and put into the backfield. Tom, I don't know how much he is going to be doing that because Ohio State's defensive line is better than anything Michigan has had. So they don't necessarily need to rely on sending that guy into the backfield. I think what we could see is White is used more in coverage, which would allow the Will or the Mike to blitz more, and maybe they get into the backfield a bit more. But how aggressive do you expect them to be with that Bullet, knowing that this isn't Don Brown's defense, but there are some parts of it here?
They, I think, are going to I would think you'll use him in coverage more because, I mean, as a guy who has a background as a safety, you would rather have him in coverage on a running back or a slot receiver than, like a Malik Harrison or a Tough Borland or someone like that.
Whoa, watch it.
I mean, I know we have both been bringing the heat with the takes tonight. I'm sure you'll see him. I mean, you don't want to be real predictable with it and have that, have the opponents know, okay, they're always going to be bringing the Will or bringing the Mike, and if Brendan White's out there, I'm sure they'll use it. But I think you're right that they will not necessarily need to lean on blitzes the way that Michigan probably has in the past, just because that front four can get so much pressure. We've seen that to the point, 5 offensive linemen blocking the 4 defensive linemen for Ohio State. That's generally not going to be a winning formula. You're going to have to keep someone else in there, and maybe that's predicated on if they're kind of picking, if the other opponent is kind of picking them apart through the air, you have to bring more pressure to get the ball out quicker or something like that. But yeah, I'm with you. I think he's probably a little bit more of a coverage guy than Jabril Peppers, which, all right, I'll give you an over-under. Starting now, Brendan White, does he beat Jabril Peppers' career college interception record of 1? Over-under 1.5 interceptions, Brendan White this year.
I'm going to go over, but only by like 3 or 4. So it'll be close.
Barely.
Let me ask you this, as we finish up the linebackers here before we move into the secondary. If there was an NCAA football game right now, who would you be starting if you were running a season with Ohio State this year?
At linebacker?
Yep.
Let's see. Were the ratings based on recruiting rankings or previous season?
Hey, you can edit them, man. You know that.
I was always a get the speed on the field guy. Yep. So yeah, and you know what? I'm thinking about this, and then I was thinking about the Taraja Mitchell truck stick, and now that's all I can think about. So I don't know. Taraja Mitchell's my starting mic, and I don't really care about the other two.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. When I'm thinking of the ideal lineup in the secondary, for me it involves Shaun Wade at strong safety, which is the guy who plays up on the line of scrimmage over the slot receiver if there is one, because I think he needs to be on the field as he's one of those playmakers. We didn't get to see Jordan Fuller, and we don't exactly know where he would line up, but for me, I would put Jordan Fuller at free safety, the deep safety, the one post safety, the one high as they would call it, and then you've got Shaun Wade, and then if it's a down and distance where Brendan White is already in a bullet, having Shaun Wade on the field allows them to move seamlessly into a nickel formation where Brendan White then moves back to safety, and Shaun Wade doesn't really move anywhere. He's while they don't run the three cornerback rotation anymore, that slot safety is essentially a corner. So you'd still have those 3 corners out there, and that's what I think his future probably is in the NFL and maybe eventually at Ohio State. But Jeff Hafley said he wants Wade to be able to play inside and outside. And for me, my ideal secondary is having Wade and Fuller in there together. And Isaiah Pryor had a good spring. Josh Proctor had a good spring. But I think Wade keeps that defense seamless and allows them to change from their base to a nickel, which is more of a dime, and just allows them to do more things, and they don't get caught not having him out there, or when they're running against an up-tempo no huddle where they can't substitute, having him out there allows them to do whatever they need to do.
I think someone called him a Swiss Army knife at one point this spring, and it was like, yeah, that is a pretty good analogy. He can do. You want him to be the nickel, that's fine. You want him to play safety and cover the slot guy at the line, that's fine. You want him to move outside, yeah, that's fine. He can do all of that stuff. There's almost no question to me that Jordan Fuller is the best deep safety on this team. I mean, we just thinking back a couple of years, he was always the guy who was making that touchdown saving tackle. I mean, I remember him. I think he had one against Nebraska a couple of years ago. I think he might have had one against, I'm thinking Rutgers, but I can't remember if Rutgers actually did
probably
anything.
Saved a game against Rutgers, I'm sure.
Probably, I don't know, like a 3-yard gain saving tackle. I don't know, against Rutgers.
He had a tackle against Saquon Barkley in the backfield, I believe, that looked like it was going to be a big hit.
Yeah, he is pretty much that prototypical deep safety where when you see one guy back there, if you have a wide receiver running, splitting some defenders and running, Jordan Fuller is probably the guy that most Ohio State fans would want to see as the last guy to beat, because Jordan Fuller seems like the guy who's not getting beat a whole lot back there. So I'm right there with you. I would love to see Josh Proctor at some point this fall. I don't know how close he is to really cracking that starting lineup. You kind of have gotten some varying answers on that from coaches at times. his name comes up enough that it seems like that's a possibility that he'll get on that field this year and be able to do something. He is, to me, he's not necessarily one of the best five or whatever in that to start the year, but he's someone I am just intrigued to see out there and think he may have to wait until Jordan Fuller graduates to have a vacant safety spot back there.
Or until Jordan Fuller gets ejected and becomes this year's Brendan White.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Targeting solves everything. I'm right with you though on Sean Wade. Like, play him at safety. He's got the cover skills to go be the safety who's on the slot guy. You move him outside if you need to move him outside. Just in terms of if they end up needing to rotate corners at some point, he can be that guy. But yeah, he is the best Ohio State defensive backfield, has him on the field somewhere, and
right.
Safety's as good a spot as any.
I would even think if he plays as well as he can this year, he will have an NFL decision already. Like Jeff Okudah will, like Brendan White even could, because he knows that this position will put him in the limelight a little bit. So I think when you look at guys who maybe out of the blue who could end up surprising and leaving, keep an eye on those two. But it's still a little bit early. Anything else, Tom, that you would like to deep dive on in the back seven for Tyler Feeney?
I don't think that Jeff Okudah is going to have much of an NFL draft decision unless he gets hurt. I think that's probably going to be a fairly easy decision if he continues the trajectory that he's on. I've seen him mentioned as a potential top 10 pick by some people for next year. And he very much seems like he's on that 3-year Ohio State corner track that we've seen with so many guys the last decade. I would be somewhat surprised if Jeff Okudah was back in 2020, right?
Yeah, and I think we maybe talked about it a week or two ago where, like, if you are a senior cornerback at Ohio State, the NFL kind of looks at you like, why? What's wrong with you? What are you missing? What aren't you good at that you thought you needed to get better at? Whereas they don't necessarily think that way for a fourth-year junior like Garyon Conley and Marshawn Lattimore and all of these other guys. But yeah, he's a Denzel Ward type in terms of the trajectory and the expectations. And I can't wait to see how him and Damon Arnett adapt to Jeff Hafley's style and what he's asking them to do and how they all adapt to this secondary, because it seems everything, Tom, we all know, like, every new defense is the right defense and it's going to be better and it's going to be this and it's going to be that. But I'm looking forward to watching what this change is, and it may be great, it may not be, but if it's not, it'll still be fun to watch. Just the explosions and the volcanoes in Columbus.
Question: will this defense continue the college football trend of every new defensive coordinator in the history of college football having an aggressive attacking mentality? Do you think they'll have an aggressive attacking mentality this fall? What do you think? Maybe?
I think so, yeah. And I think it'll be a more fun defense to play in as well. But, we're not trying to say anything bad about the last coaches. But, yeah, we like how things are going.
Also, since just to cross all our T's and dot all our I's because we're talking about the defensive backs, we promise, we watched them practice looking back for the football. They are practicing looking back for the football when the ball is in the air. We saw it. We saw it with our own eyes. They had drills specifically to look back for the football. So you have that to look forward to this fall.
I even had a video of Jeff Hafley talking about it at the coaches clinic, and I put it up on YouTube, and I had to take it down because Ohio State frowned upon having a bunch of that stuff put on the internet because, I guess coaches will learn how to coach for free from the internet rather than going there. So I understand that they don't want their premium stuff being put out there, but it was just an interesting video of Jeff Hafley talking about looking back, and it was like 5 minutes, and it was really interesting, but I had to take it down. Maybe I can do a transcription of it, which I will never do. But yes, Tom, they are definitely looking back for the ball. They are practicing it. he was gleefully showing clips during the clinic of, now watch how this guy does it, watch, and this is beautiful, and that's beautiful, and they're all looking back. So they are making an effort. Let's just hope it doesn't lead to 6 touchdown passes allowed per game because they keep looking back for the ball.
If they do, I think we'll all know that people will accept that. Hey, look, I asked you to look back for the ball. You did it. That's on me.
I accept responsibility for this. Yes. Please continue.
All right. Next question from a fantastic Twitter handle at Brian Cromulent. Maybe you've touched on this recently or don't have any news on this, but do we have any idea how Thayer Munford's recovery from the back injury is coming along?
No, and we really don't, Tom. The only hint that we have that he'll be okay is the fact that his coaches talk about him being back in the fall. So while we have said since December how this is not good, Greg Studrawa, Ryan Day have not had that same attitude or haven't mentioned any of those comments. But surprisingly, they were never asked really about the possibility that Munford wouldn't be able to go. And I know I could have asked about it, Tom could have asked about it, but you only get so many questions and there's so many things to ask about that you don't always remember everything. But I guess maybe, I don't know if no news is good news, no news is bad news, but the fact that they always talk about him as if he'll be back is the best news that Buckeye fans have.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that you can't read that much into, because what it would look like if they were pretty confident he was going to play this fall, but were holding him out this spring as precaution, is a lot like what it would look like if it was. We don't know the exact nature of this back injury. Is this a disc injury? Is this some kind of spinal thing? We don't know. We just know back. So what it looked like this spring if they were holding him out as a precautionary thing is a lot like what it would look like if they were holding him out and sort of hoping that something was going to fix itself on its own without needing surgery, but it might need surgery. Like that looks exactly the same this spring. So you don't want to draw too many conclusions right now because we don't know the exact nature of the issue, but until you see him out on that practice field, it's a concern, because we have not seen him with a helmet on since the Big Ten championship game. He was sitting in the golf cart for the practices before the Rose Bowl. He was just walking around the field during all the practices this spring. He has not been in helmet and shoulder pads since the Big Ten championship game. Until you see him in helmet and shoulder pads at some point, I think it has to remain a concern, because it's whatever it is, it's not fixed yet. So that's not great. Now they had all spring where they played without him, and they had a whole bunch. They had guys repping with Josh Allaby repping at left tackle. He played the Rose Bowl. He did a fine job in the Rose Bowl. So it's not the end of the world. They have a guy who is a veteran and has done this before and is a perfectly capable left tackle, but it's a drop off, and you would rather have Munford out.
Let me ask you this: on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being absolutely surprised and 10 being not surprised at all, how surprised would you be to see Thayer Munford not practicing on day 1 of fall camp?
Probably about a 6. Like it would not surprise me at all if he was. It would not be a big surprise if he was not practicing this fall.
What was the betting favorite there? Is it practicing or not practicing for that first?
I am going to until I see him in shoulder pads and a helmet, I'm going to assume that there's something significantly wrong that is going to hold him out this year. But again, this is speculation, and I want to be clear on that. This is speculation. This is not reporting. This is just I have at points in the past had back issues, and it's not great, and it's not necessarily something that goes away on its own. And so until I see him out there, I'm going to assume I'm not going to see him out there. But it's another fall camp doesn't open for another 3 full months. So there's a lot of time between then and now. And it's been pretty tight-lipped around the program about this. Like we had heard back and that he wasn't going to play in the Rose Bowl before the Rose Bowl. That was something we had kind of heard, and I haven't heard anything more one way or the other recently, which kind of makes me wonder and have a little bit of concern. Next one, at Ryan from Seabus, and we're going to take a quick turn into Game of Thrones here.
Sorry.
What was Jon Snow not petting Ghost as he left the saddest moment in TV history?
Tom, for one, we don't need to get too in-depth about this, but I expect Jon Snow to end up in the North with Ghost again, so they'll be fine. I think the saddest moment in television history for me was the finale of The Sopranos, watching Meadow try to parallel park for like the last 4 minutes of the show. And it was heartbreaking. Just torture to watch that back and forth and out and up and back and forth. So that's one of them for me. What about you?
Well, first of all, on the issue of the dire wolves, I read something today about why they made that decision.
Uh-huh.
Was this a deeply symbolic thing that you should read a lot into? I'm going to read the direct quote from the director. Ready? Since the dire wolves are kind of CG creations, meaning computer graphic, we felt it best to keep it as simple as possible. It played out much more powerfully that way.
Yeah.
So, if you wanted to read a lot of subtext into that decision, the subtext is the wolf is not real and it's kind of complicated to make the ears bend or something when Jon Snow pets it, I guess. I don't know. So they were too busy CGIing Starbucks cups into that episode. They didn't have time to make the wolf pet.
And yet they can have 3 dragons, but you know what? A dog, that's a bit much.
I mean, it's a big dog. So, yeah, for me, the saddest moment in TV history is when Lisa breaks Ralph's heart on TV.
Oh, God.
And then Bart plays it frame by frame. You can actually see the moment where his heart breaks.
That was a bad one. Another bad one is the episode of Brown Thunder where Don Brown was on patrol, and by on patrol, he was just staked out in a local pond behind a bush, and a couple of guys robbed a bank, and their getaway was on this pond, and they jumped in a paddle boat to escape, and they didn't know Don Brown was there. How could they? But Don Brown soon was in pursuit, and then he got, I believe it was a cramp in his right leg, so he could only paddle with his left leg, which then just spun the paddle boat in a round, big right circle, and the bank robbers got away, and one of them ended up, I think, shooting and killing Uncle Ben, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben, which is what drove Peter Parker to become Spider-Man. Tom, I don't know how you feel about it. It's a pretty ballsy decision by the writers of Brown Thunder to go ahead and incorporate themselves into Spider-Man's origin.
I didn't realize we were going to deep dive the Brown Thunder cinematic universe today, but I think the major takeaway from that scene is that Don Brown should have been in a zone on that pond, because you get man and you get toasted, and then the bank robbers get away with 62 points.
Well done, sir.
Next one from at Brian Cromulent. Now that Ohio State has Gunnar Hoke, we need to know how well he runs quarterback power on 3rd and 1, maybe on 4th and 1 as well, if you're up to analyzing that too.
Tom, I think we both know that he will be able to run it better than Dwayne Haskins. They don't call him Gunnar the Runner for nothing.
It's a good thing his first name rhymes with that, because otherwise I'd have deep concerns about this year, but it should be fine.
Yes, it should be fine. Totally.
When has something that rhymed not worked out? Come on.
It's good. That's a good point.
He's a mobile enough guy that he will do probably just fine if they ask him to do that. He has, he's not Justin Fields back there, but he's mobile enough that he can be a maybe between a Matthew Baldwin and a JT Barrett kind of level runner, somewhere in that range. Yeah, somewhere in that range. So just, he's not Justin Fields, he's not Braxton Miller, but he doesn't have to be. If it's 4th and 1 and the line blocks it properly, he is more than mobile enough to pick that up. That's not.
Yep.
And I mean, think back to Ohio State quarterbacks running on 4th and 1. Have they ever not picked it up? No, they pick it up every time, and they pick it up with plenty of room to spare. Like it's never even close. It's never even controversial.
Certainly not in the regular season.
No, certainly not in the regular. Next one from the worst, Langdon Alger. If you're drafting Big Ten head coaches, who goes in the first 5 picks?
And I mentioned earlier that before the show, I was checking out like last year's shows around this time, what we were doing. And one of them was, let's draft Big Ten head coaches. And the first pick was obviously Urban Meyer. And the next two were like a 1A, 1B of James Franklin and Scott Frost. But now with Urban Meyer gone, where does the power lie? Because we've mentioned before, like where does Ryan Day end up in the Big Ten coaches rankings? So, Tom, if you had let's just go with the top 3 or top 4 or top 5 if you want. If you were drafting the Big Ten head coaches, what order are you going in?
Let's define our terms here. Are we drafting them based on they have the exact same team, which coach squeezes the most wins out of that roster? Let's say
they're coaching Michigan.
Okay, so like average-ish Big Ten talent, okay.
Poor facilities, yes. Terrible fans.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So crowd noise isn't a factor, okay. I think you've got to go with Scott Frost, number 1. And there's a decent case to be made for Jeff Brom from Purdue being number 2. James Franklin has had very good results at Penn State. Jim Harbaugh's had good results at Michigan, but they have a lot more to work with than Brom. I mean, Brom came into a place where everything had been burned to the ground and the earth salted, and they are now, almost immediately were a competent and then solid Big Ten program, and had that one big win over Ohio State last year. And you saw the limitations of Purdue last year in that bowl game where they just got firebombed by Auburn. But you have that level of a personnel disadvantage, and you still, I think they've made a bowl game each of the last 2 years. That's real impressive. And he's one of those people that you'd like to see him with a higher level of talent and see what he could do with it. Because sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think if you gave Jeff Brom, I think we have seen what James Franklin is going to do. We have seen what Jim Harbaugh is going to do. Like, there's a ceiling there. Jeff Brom, I don't know if we know what the ceiling for a Jeff Brom team is. If you give him the USC roster this time next year, or, something like that, where it's a real top level, you can attract top level talent kind of place. I don't know that we know what the ceiling is there. And I think we kind of do know the ceiling with like the Franklins and the Harbaughs and those guys.
Like Pat Fitzgerald, I don't think he has enough pressure on him for us to really see how he would do at a big time place, because he can go 5-7 one year, 9-3, 9-4, and they remember the 9-4 and they thank him for that. And at that place, you understand that sometimes there's going to be rosters where you're too young to really be good. It's similar at Iowa, where you give them a couple years when everybody hits the right level of maturity, and they're very good. But for me, there's like 8 coaches that you could maybe talk about in the top 5, being Scott Frost, Ryan Day, James Franklin, Jeff Brom, Mark D'Antonio, Jim Harbaugh, PJ Fleck, Pat Fitzgerald. And PJ Fleck is just maybe. I think he's probably one you could drop out. Mark D'Antonio is losing quite a bit of luster by the year. We'll see if he can get into that top 5 or 6. I wonder if Jim Harbaugh is like the 4th or 5th best candidate for the job he actually has among Big Ten coaches. I don't know what to do with Ryan Day yet. We all expect him to be fine and to be very good, but we've only seen him head coach 3 times with a team that wasn't really his. And to put him ahead of Scott Frost or James Franklin or Jeff Brom or even Mark D'Antonio or Jim Harbaugh is a projection based on just assumption. And so this is a very terrible question, and it's a terrible thing to have to eventually rank these Big Ten East head coaches. But I'm still going to take him in my top 5. We like you said, we know what Jim Harbaugh is. So do you go with the devil versus Ryan Day? Maybe, but maybe only after like 5 or 6 years of being tired of or ready for something new from other than Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I would feel reasonably confident that Ryan Day could get a 10-2 season out of Michigan this year or last year. I don't think that's unreasonable. So I think in that way you could consider him kind of the equivalent of Harbaugh right now. And the early returns from him have been good. The recruiting has been by and large good. The returns from the first 3 games of last season were good. Everything, it didn't look like a disorganized mess, but you're just kind of sitting at Urban Meyer's desk for a couple weeks, and so it's not really your program. So he really does get an incomplete. This is going to be a weird analogy, but do you remember when I was a kid, when I was home from school, like sick during the day, you'd watch, whatever, I Love Lucy reruns or Happy Days reruns or whatever was on during the middle of the day. And they would have these commercials for like art school, like
yes,
apply to an art school and, write this address and get, for your free art test.
Yep.
And, Ryan Day has drawn the parrot or whatever it is on the art test. And it looks great. It looks really good. But it's actually, that is the most cursory of initial exams to, it's not really a true measure of you. So yeah, he has passed the initial test, which was don't let the ceiling fall in during the first 3 games last year. Don't let the ceiling fall in on recruiting. Like he's done a very good job maintaining what he took over. So there's a very good chance that Ryan Day is top 2-ish on this list a year from now. But right now it's just he's gets an incomplete, and it's hard to put him. I don't think you can definitively put him number 3 on this list ahead of Franklin or Harbaugh, because you know what you have there, and it's not amazing, it's not great,
but you
know what you have there, and Day, I think, is just kind of a little bit of an incomplete. It's better than Mike Locksley, who's the new Maryland coach, who, there is a track record to look back on there, and boy, howdy did that not go well. He was like 3-30 when he was the head coach of New Mexico, and he's supposedly grown and matured and blah 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 since then. And yeah, maybe that is quite possibly true, but there is a reason we have not mentioned Mike Locksley's name. What's interesting is how deep this conference is, because there are you can very easily, out of the 14 coaches in the league, you could very easily say 8 to 9 of them are good, worthy of some kind of discussion here. I mean, Kirk Ferentz.
Yep. You
can talk about Paul Chryst, whether or not he belongs there, but I mean, PJ Fleck, like you mentioned, I mean,
Paul Chryst is perfect where he is. That's why I wouldn't, I don't really feel like putting him up against somebody else. He's Paul Chryst of Wisconsin, so there's no reason to talk about him doing something at Michigan.
Right? Yeah. Mark D'Antonio, like I think we have seen the high water mark of the Mark D'Antonio era at Michigan State. It would not surprise me. I don't know. I'll probably write like a 5 coaches on the hot seat this year kind of thing and put Mark D'Antonio's name in there, and everyone will go, "What? That's crazy." But it has not been great at Michigan State for quite a while, and the shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic thing that they did with their offensive coaching staff, that's a red flag. That is hanging on to staffers out of loyalty that is going to get you fired at some point. And that if they have a bad year this year and lose to Michigan and lose to Ohio State, and miss a bowl game, like that's there could be change coming to East Lansing sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and just to go back to your art analogy real quick, him drawing that parrot perfectly is more like tracing, because he's, the art is based on taking over Urban Meyer's program for 3 games. That's not freehand. That's tracing. So the art college would probably be like, you know what? We're going to need to see a little bit more, just like we are. We are basically, Tom, an art college.
A correspondence art college that advertises during I Love Lucy reruns. Yes, that's.
If I had to draw a turtle
podcast in one
you're
sentence,
good enough for
yes.
us. Yes.
Next one from Monique Fredrickson. How much should your children dislike Michigan? My kids won't say the name and sometimes glare at people wearing Michigan stuff, but are never rude when they actually interact. Interesting question, though. How much should your kids be raised to really dislike them?
I wasn't raised to dislike Michigan. I don't even remember being raised a Buckeye fan. We just were. But like, it's almost something like you shouldn't have to teach them. Like you shouldn't have to teach them how to speak. They should just pick that up from learning from you, right? Like, do as you do.
It's like a baby dolphin, like teaching a baby dolphin how to swim. Like, no, you should just be born with that knowledge. Like that's.
And if they're not, then you have failed as a parent. Your genes are terrible.
I guess this is a hard question for me to answer because I did not grow up in an Ohio State household. And when I came to school at Ohio State, Michigan was beating Ohio State and crushing their hopes and dreams every single year. So it was not very difficult to figure out how everyone in Columbus felt about Michigan at that time. So, I mean, this is going to be one of these extremely kids today have no idea, but I mean, like the kids who graduated Ohio State this year were in kindergarten in 2004, 2003 season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, literally the entire time they have been aware of college football, Ohio State has lost to Michigan once. So it probably does require a little more education if you're going to.
That's true.
If you're going to impart that now than it did back in the 90s.
Yeah, my parents didn't teach me to hate Michigan growing up. John Cooper did. John Cooper was my Michigan dad. But he that'll get you hating Michigan as quickly as anything. Let me ask you this: if, like, say one of your kids punches a Michigan fan in school and they get a detention or a suspension, do you just consider that time served?
I don't know if taking them out to ice cream is the right response, but
we're gonna get you whatever you want, baby.
See, I'm not the person to ask about this because my son, when he was much younger, was obsessed with trains.
Yeah.
So then she started thinking Purdue was pretty cool because their logo was a train, and I'm explaining to him, okay, buddy, like on the whole, you're going to be happier being an Ohio State fan because Ohio State wins more than Purdue does. And then last year happened, and so now Dad doesn't have a ton of credibility in this space anymore. So thanks, Greg Schiano.
Yeah. So there you go.
All right, next one from Indiana Buckeye. Which of the current assistant football coaches will be the first to get a head coaching gig somewhere else? I have one on offense and one on defense, so I'll let you go first.
Okay. Because I don't really, when I look at who would be the first to get a gig somewhere else, oh yeah, I guess I do have one on defense, Jeff Hafley. But for me, it was, he was the first guy, Jeff Hafley, but I don't know. We have to find out how much he likes being in college because he was in the NFL for 7 years. Yes, he came back. We'll see how that works out for him. Kevin Wilson, I think, having gone from Urban Meyer to now Ryan Day, I wonder if he has been, like, if his image has been rehabilitated enough. And I know he's frustrated by the lack of becoming a head coach again. And you wonder if maybe his sights will, maybe it can't be in Indiana. Maybe it has to be a Ball State, something like that, or Miami of Ohio, where he came from as well. Will he want to be a head coach again to do it at that level, or will he like to remain doing this at Ohio State or a similar school, being the the offensive coordinator, and maybe he'll want to go do it somewhere else where he can call the plays. It's weirdly, I might have him ahead of Jeff Hafley, who are my two. Mike Yurcich also in there, but I think it's still too early for him to beat one of these other two out. But if Hafley turns this Ohio State defense into, dynamite, then, like Alex Grinch did, they may only get 1 year out of him.
So in this example, is he turning Ohio State's defense into dynamite that they are using to do something constructive, or are they blowing themselves up like the Coyote, like the Alex Grinch defense did?
Yeah, no, total implosion, building implosion, that kind of demolition.
Yeah, I mean, Hafley is the number one name that popped into my head, and if he's, I mean, you brought up question number one, which is, so how much does he like college versus the pros? And question number two is, how long will it take before he's really ready to take over his own program? Because I think he's on that kind of Ryan Day track. If he takes over, if he wants to stay in college, if he wants to be a head coach, it's probably a couple years away, a couple years of college coaching away from getting a job, and he's probably not getting an Ohio State caliber job in 2 years. But
you still have to learn how to be a head coach, like a college head coach, and everything that entails.
Yeah, there's this. That's not something you can just walk in and do, because when you have a pro guy who walks in and tries to be a college coach, that's how you get Bill Callahan. That didn't go great in Nebraska. So
Charlie Weiss.
Yep. It's a little bit of a process. Kevin Wilson's a good possibility. He has done the 2-year stint in Urban Meyer's Home for Wayward Boys, like a couple other coordinators did. So for him, it's probably a question of what does he want to do versus how much money does he want to give up to do it? Because the kind of head coaching gig he's getting is not paying as much as his current job is. Because he's making, I think he's close to $1 million this year, if I remember correctly. Ball State's not giving you $1 million a year. That's a $400,000 a year gig. So
could he replace Luke Fickell?
He could. That's possible. Although there have certainly been
Marcus Freeman
suggestions that there's another that the next Cincinnati coach position has already been filled basically by Marcus Freeman. So the other name that you haven't mentioned, I mean, Yurcich is a possibility. He's a good offensive mind. I think I would like to see more of him just personality-wise before you know exactly how he's going to do as a head coach, because there is a lot of being a head coach that goes beyond just football smart, because I think the football smart is kind of a given with him. But we I think talked to him once this spring, maybe twice, but the first time he just seemed very nervous, and because I'm sure that the press corps in Columbus is about 15 times larger than the press corps in Stillwater, so that was probably a little bit jarring, and he just seemed like he was being very cautious with everything he said. And the second time we talked to him for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that, and that was about it. And he didn't jump out at you like Jeff Hafley, like this guy is a ball of personality. But, he's certainly on that list. The guy that you didn't mention that I think is kind of a decent chance to be a head coach in a couple of years somewhere, and this is probably like a MAC school somewhere, but if Bowling Green or Kent State is looking for a head coach in a couple of years, Brian Hartline would not be a bad choice. Young, got the NFL experience, energetic, great recruiter. Like he's someone is going to give him a chance, I think, pretty soon. And it's just a matter of is that what he wants to do? Does he just want to stay at Ohio State? Like what is his long-term career vision? In the same, kind of the same way that you're wondering about, Kevin Wilson, what are his priorities? If Brian Hartline wants to be a college head coach, I think someone pretty smart is going to give him an opportunity probably in the next couple of years, and it's just a matter of whether he wants it or not.
Is he the Urban Meyer go from receiver coach to head coach at a MAC school? Does he become an offensive coordinator at Ohio State somehow? Because one of those two things are going to happen, or he'll go somewhere else and be an offensive coordinator. And this is, again, speculation alert, but he's not just going to stay a receivers coach at Ohio State. Daryl Hazel went from receivers coach to head coach at Kent State and was there for a couple years before going on to Purdue and doing some tremendous things there. But he was also like associate head coach and some other things at Ohio State. It'll be interesting to watch Brian Hartline just now in not even in his second full year as Ohio State's receivers coach to see his trajectory, because I think everybody would agree it's like this. And when I say it like this, I'm doing my hand thing like this, up.
I think there's a decent possibility that he follows that Urban Meyer track where you just skip the coordinator position and just go get a college coaching job. Bowling Green hired, and I keep, every time I think about this, I shake my head. It's like they've assembled the like the worst version of the college football Avengers. It's Scott Loeffler, who was like the perpetually awful offensive coordinator at every terrible, unwatchable college football offense of the last 15 years. Like, he was the offensive coordinator for Michigan under some of those terrible Michigan teams. He was the offensive coordinator in Virginia Tech when it was, you know, some of those Frank Beamer teams that couldn't move the ball. He was the offensive coordinator in Boston College when they couldn't move the ball. And then he brings in Brian Van Gorder as his defensive coordinator. And Brian Van Gorder is one of the most hilariously inept college football defensive coordinators in history. He's the one he was the head coach at Georgia Southern like 10 years ago. I think he was the guy who took over after Paul Johnson left for Navy. And they have a history of running the triple option down at Georgia Southern. And Brian Van Gorder basically said, "Oh, I'm not doing that crap." And lasted, it might have been just one season, and got fired because he was such a disaster. And then he was the defensive coordinator for Louisville last year, which that went great. Louisville football 2018. And Paul Johnson finally got a chance to face Brian Van Gorder. Oh dear Lord. Watch the highlights from last year's 2018 Georgia Tech Louisville game. It is, I am a triple option connoisseur, aficionado, and it is an absolute masterpiece of just beautiful, wonderful pettiness from Paul Johnson. I think they ran for like 600 yards. It was just absolutely beautiful. So anyway, circling back to my actual point, instead of hiring Scott Loeffler, who's been awful everywhere, and Brian Van Gorder, who's been awful everywhere, shoot your shot. Like, you're Bowling Green. You basically have not been relevant since Urban Meyer left, almost. So shoot your shot. Like, that's the job. Give that job to Brian Hartline and see what happens. You are not going to get worse than you are. Like, the ceiling on a Scott Loeffler team is, I don't know, if everything breaks right, exactly right, 6-6, maybe. Like, try and catch lightning in a bottle with a Brian Hartline. Like, that's exactly the kind of guy that they should have gone after. Because yeah, he's probably not ready for that job yet, but give it a shot. Like, why not?
It goes back to what Lou Holtz told Urban Meyer when Urban Meyer said, you know, I'm not going to take the Bowling Green job because it's not a good job. And Lou Holtz told him if it was a good job, they wouldn't be offering it to you. And, you know, if you want to be head coach, you got to start somewhere. And if you want it now, maybe that's where he goes. But again, this is all speculation.
This is more informed speculation than the Thayer Munford segment, but it's still pretty speculative. Next one from Heinegate. What are reasonable expectations for Day in the wake of JT and Urban in the next 5 years? And JT being Jim Tressel, not JT Barrett.
Yes. My thought is a reasonable expectation, and I think you have to dial back. You know, it used to be like before the playoffs. I think a national title every 5 years would be a reasonable expectation for a guy who takes over Urban Meyer's program. But then you get into in the Final Four, it's harder to win a national title. Just as Jim Tressel won all kinds of Big Ten titles until, you know, there's a Big Ten championship game, it becomes a lot more difficult to win a Big Ten championship. And, you know, Urban Meyer doesn't have the list of Big Ten titles that Jim Tressel does. but they weren't playing on the same field. It wasn't the same type of schedule. It wasn't the same deal. And I don't know, I think it is, maybe it's unfair to expect a national title once in a 5-year span. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect like a national title appearance in that same span. Where is that reasonable, or should Ohio State expect a national title? I just think going to the Final Four in basketball, winning the NCAA tournament, I don't think that should never be an expectation, or you're asking too much for that to be an expectation, because you're going against the top teams and matchups, and it's just not something you can plan on doing. You try to do it, but if you fall short, it's not like you have necessarily failed. I feel like I'm going to have to feel that same way in football, where getting to the playoffs is good. Getting to the title game is reasonably all you should expect in a 5-year span.
Yeah, I, in general, think that it is unreasonable to expect an undefeated season. Like, it's extremely hard to do. I don't think that that's a reasonable thing to demand. If you don't have an undefeated season in the next 5 years, you are a failure. That's number one. And getting to the playoff and getting to the championship game, I think that it's probably more realistic to say, be in the conversation, be watching that playoff selection show on that Saturday morning in December or Sunday morning in December, with a legitimate chance of Ohio State getting in a couple times during that 5-year span, at least a couple times, maybe 3 times. Because you go back to the last few years of Urban Meyer, 2012 they were not eligible, but they would have made it if there was a college football playoff. 2013 they were basically 1 quarter away from being in what would have been a college football playoff field. They would have been in the BCS national championship that year. 2014 they obviously made it, but it was close. 2015 they arguably should have made it, but got left out. 2016 they made it. 2017 they were in that conversation. 2018 they were in that conversation, and they get left out each of the last 2 years. There's a lot that goes into making that playoff that is out of your control. So I think if you are ending that, coming out of Big Ten championship game weekend, and you're in that top 5, top 6, three times maybe in the next 5 years, I think that would be very successful. And that necessitates winning 2 to 3 Big Ten championships. Right. That necessitates beating Michigan each of those years. If you said Ryan Day goes 3-2 against Michigan in the next 5 years, wins 2 Big Ten championships, is top 6 in the college football playoff rankings 3 times, that is a wildly successful 5-year span. And if you're, I don't know, 10-2 the other 2 years, and you're playing in one of the other New Year's Six bowls, 5 New Year's Six bowls, and 3 times you're in that college football playoff conversation, like that would be a wildly successful run. And I think there's a lot of people who would consider that just an abject failure after the Urban Meyer era, which is, I mean, the question asked about reasonable expectations. Those are reasonable expectations. I don't think a lot of people have reasonable expectations going into the Ryan Day era, which is why you don't want to be the guy that follows the legend.
Yeah. 3-2 against Michigan is acceptable because it's a winning record and you win more than you lost. But I wonder how many fans would view that as acceptable for Ryan Day.
Really, probably none. This has been such a historically anomalous stretch for Ohio State football for literally a generation to go 16-2 against Michigan and 14-1 against Michigan. I mean, 14 out of 15 years they beat Michigan. Like it's
not normal.
That's to go 14-1 against Northwestern in a 15-year span would be like, oh, that's pretty good. Or to do that against Iowa or Purdue or
not Purdue.
Yeah. I mean, think about how often they've lost to Purdue. They've lost to Purdue, 4 times in that same span and have not played them nearly as many times as they've played Michigan. Like, it is crazy and completely unrealistic to expect that. Like, even their record against Penn State is pretty good. I mean, the record against Penn State is good. I couldn't tell you what it is offhand because it's not a rivalry, so I don't remember. But it's what if they lost 4 times to Penn State or 5 times to Penn State since 2001? I mean, it's that would be a remarkable stretch against Michigan, and to do that, to go whatever that is, 12-5 or whatever it is against Michigan now, people say, well, why are they losing to Michigan so much? That's just the expectations are at a level where there is literally almost nowhere to go but down.
Yeah.
And everyone is looking at Clemson as why can't Ohio State be like Clemson? Why can't Ohio State be like Alabama? Like, well, there are 2 programs that are that. And it's real hard to be one of those 2 programs. And Ohio State has been in that conversation for a long, long time. And even some of the latter Urban Meyer years, people were not real happy with how things were going for long stretches of those seasons. And then you look back and it's like, well, yes, they were 13-1 last year, but people weren't real thrilled with it. And yes, they were, whatever it was, 12-1, 13-1 in 2015, but people weren't real happy with it. And it's like, those are seasons that probably 125 other fan bases would kill for. And Ohio State fans are like, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't great.
I've seen better.
That is not a level you can sustain, and that's already a level that's kind of considered like, it's all right, I guess, if you have to. So the question is about reasonable expectations, and reasonable has nothing to do with Ohio State fan expectations. Is I guess the actual answer to the question.
Fair enough.
All right, last one from Buckeye 86. If Notre Dame is undefeated again against a weak schedule, how will they be perceived by the playoff committee, especially ahead of a 1-loss Big Ten team with a better resume? And before we do this, I'm going to run down Notre Dame's schedule.
All right.
Okay. At Louisville. Okay, that's pretty weak. Home for New Mexico. Okay, that's pretty weak. September 21st, at Georgia. Yeah, that's not bad. Home for Virginia. Home for Bowling Green. Home for USC. Week off. At Michigan. Home for Virginia Tech, at Duke, home for Navy, home for Boston College, at Stanford. So you have three difficult road games at Georgia, at Michigan, at Stanford, and then everything else is kind of
Yeah, they don't have the difficult ACC portion of their schedule, but the Georgia, the Michigan, the Stanford, that's plenty for them to outrank a 1-loss Ohio State or Big Ten champion. Possibly. I still think there's going to be discussion depending on what that team looks like, but they've got enough on their schedule to where, not that we have to worry about it, because they're not going to go to Georgia and win, which will eliminate them pretty quickly. But if you win at Georgia, you win at Michigan, you win at Stanford, I don't think you can call that a weak schedule, even if you do have Bowling Green and a few weak teams, but they have so many other Power 5 teams that Ohio State would take that schedule. It's not that dissimilar from an Ohio State schedule, and this year it's even harder considering the Buckeyes don't play any Power 5 non-conference opponents, do they?
No, they don't, because of the TCU scheduling change. No, they don't play any Power 5 teams. Now, I mean, the Cincinnati game is probably tougher than tougher than Louisville, tougher than Virginia, tougher than Duke. I mean, you could make a decent argument that Cincinnati this year is going to be a better team than any of the 5 ACC teams that Notre Dame plays: Louisville, Virginia Tech, Duke, Boston College. Yeah, I mean, Ohio State's not going to get a ton of credit for playing Cincinnati. Cincinnati is no joke this year. Cincinnati could very easily be like an 11-2 kind of team.
Yeah, that might be something
top 25.
Right, they get more credit later on in the season than when they actually play.
Yep. I guess the real question is, okay, if Notre Dame loses, like goes and just gets smoked at Georgia, and they're 11-1, not a conference champion, and the Big Ten champion is 11-2, then what happens? If Notre Dame has one loss, but it's a bad loss at Georgia. Is that at that point, does the Big Ten champion get the conference championship credit and get boosted over Notre Dame at that point? Because an undefeated team, until a major conference Power 5 / Notre Dame team goes undefeated and gets left out, you have to assume they're going to be in. If it's a one-loss team and they've lost at Georgia and it maybe wasn't particularly close, and they also don't have the conference championship, that's what I think that's more of an interesting conversation.
I do wonder, you don't want to put too much faith in the Big Ten getting any benefit of the doubt from the committee, but at some point you wonder, are they going to be like, enough, we have to let them in this time? And so if all things being equal, then maybe they side on the Big Ten just because, it's starting to look like it's bad. It's starting to look, we're losing trust of the trust of the American people. So maybe they side with the Big Ten, but I'm not going to put any faith in them giving the benefit of the doubt of the Big Ten. So I guess my suggestion would be to win a Big Ten title and don't lose badly to a team that you should not lose badly to. Just pro tip.
Sounds like good advice. Don't go to Nebraska and give up 500 yards this year. Okay?
I'm telling you.
Let me write that down. Yeah, if Ohio State's 12-1 and they lose by 3 touchdowns at Nebraska this year, like that's not. I mean, I guess you might have a chance to avenge the Nebraska loss at the end later in the Big Ten championship game. So maybe, but yeah, don't do what Donnie Don't does. Like don't go on the road and lose by 3 touchdowns like Urban Meyer did the last couple of years. Like just
don't.
You're allowed to lose. Just lose 21-17 like a normal person. Don't give up 55 points to someone don't give up 55 points to Kirk Ferentz.
Definitely. Although, you know what? 2 first-round tight ends, how do you stop that kind of offense? You can't. I'm sure if you look back, you'll see Iowa scoring 55 points a lot that season. Now, we don't have time to do that now.
I'll go if you want to vamp for a moment. I'll add up how many months they scored 55 points in that year, and I bet it's not all of them.
But Ohio State, if they go 12-1, win a Big Ten title, and with that, if they can avenge the Nebraska loss, and at this point, I think we all agree that they're going to lose at Nebraska. I can speak for all of us comfortably in saying that, but if you can get blown out in that game, but if you beat them in the Big Ten championship game, I think it erases that enough to where it doesn't disqualify you like it did last year with the Purdue loss. So there's some hope there that once you're not playing in Nebraska anymore, once you're getting them in Indianapolis, you can turn the tables and maybe not go 0-2 against them this season.
And just in case you were curious, in the 2 games prior and 2 games after the Ohio State game in 2017, Iowa scored 10, 17, 14, and 15 points. So adding those up, that would be 56 points in 4 games, and they scored 55 against Ohio State.
Yeah, sorry, Tom. We don't have time to add those numbers up.
That seems not great.
Not great. Bob.
Not ideal.
No, but that was a long time ago, and it hasn't happened since. Only one other time. And it hasn't happened since it happened the last time. And sure.
No.
Sure, there have been no games really. Yeah, that's true.
No one's cracked 50 points on them since 2017. Last time they gave up 49 points. Well, hey, look at this. Look at what
we don't have time. We don't have time to look those numbers up. We've got to wrap up this show.
When was the last time they gave up 62 points? There's the real question.
Yeah, that doesn't happen to a lot of guys, a lot of teams, just bad ones. We've ripped on Michigan a lot, and it's really not. It's unbecoming, and it's not on purpose. It's just one of those things where I guess it's May. Give us some leniency. We all respect Michigan. I can speak for all of us in saying that. But yes, teach your kids to hate Michigan. Obviously, be a good parent. Don't make us call Child Protective Services on you. All right. If they show up to school wearing Michigan stuff, that you know what? That's what yeah, you can't have that. That's where maybe the neighbors need to get involved, principals need to get involved, bus drivers for sure. If they see that, they should. If you see something, say something. You know, that's where I'm coming from. Tom, you have anything else on Notre Dame?
No, I think we're good on Notre Dame.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. This May show with nothing to talk about. We thank you all for listening. Thank you for the listener questions and getting us through this week. Thank you for the consistent and constant, although not constant, but thank you all of you who have rated and reviewed the show. Tom, I don't want to do what a lot of podcasts do, where they give shout outs to all of the people who rate and review the show. So we'll just thank everybody, and this thank you was for you. So continue to tell your friends about the show, neighbors, the same people that you would tell if you saw a kid wearing a Michigan shirt. Thank you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say well, now say well. Oh yeah. Say well, now say well. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave